The Colosseum stood like a monstrous crown in the heart of Rome, its towering arches casting shadows over the restless city. Inside, tens of thousands of citizens pressed against one another, their voices rising in a tide of anticipation that drowned out even the trumpets announcing the day's games. Rome prided itself on discipline, law, and civilization. But within those walls, it craved something else entirely: blood. The emperor himself, seated upon his gilded chair, raised a hand, and silence rippled outward like the wake of a stone tossed into water. What followed would be both entertainment and a ritual of power, meant to remind the people that Rome's glory was written in violence. The gates creaked open with the grinding of iron chains, and from the darkness emerged the first gladiators. They wore mismatched armor, one with a crested helmet gleaming like the head of a predator, another with only a small shield strapped to his bare chest. Their eyes scanned the arena floor, where sand had already been darkened with the stains of prior contests. The crowd roared, not because they knew these men, but because they knew what was about to unfold. One would live, the other would die, and both would suffer. This was the Roman promise. The clash began with a speed that startled even the most seasoned spectators. Steel rang against steel, the sound echoing upward to the marble seats. Each movement was met with cries, gasps, and cheers, as if the very citizens of Rome were inside the fight themselves. The gladiators were more than men. They were performers in the empire's cruelest theater. But beneath their rehearsed aggression was desperation. Some fought for coin, some for honor, but most fought for the faintest chance at freedom, though that promise was often nothing more than a lie whispered to keep them obedient. One gladiator stumbled, his shield shattered beneath the weight of a brutal strike. The crowd's voice swelled as his opponent pressed forward. A final blow drove him to the sand, and his helmet clattered free, revealing the youth of his face, barely more than a boy. He lifted his hand in supplication, his bloodied fingers trembling toward the emperor. The silence that followed was heavier than any roar. Thousands of Romans held their breath, waiting for the tilt of a hand, the gesture of mercy or death. The emperor paused, savoring the moment, knowing that in his decision rested not just the life of a gladiator, but the mood of the entire city. Then, with a slight downward flick of his thumb, he sealed the boy's fate. The victor delivered the fatal strike, and the Colosseum erupted in thunderous approval as crimson spread across the sand. But death was not the day's only entertainment. What came next was a spectacle meant to test the stomach of every man, woman, and child watching. From the shadowed cages beneath the arena floor, slaves drove out wild beasts captured from distant provinces, lions with ribs showing from hunger, leopards whose eyes burned with feral rage. Their roars shook the air as chains were loosed, and the beasts lunged forward. The audience shrieked with delight as terrified prisoners were herded into the ring, unarmed and trembling. These were not gladiators trained to fight, but common criminals, deserters, and unlucky souls accused of defying Rome. To the people, their suffering was justice disguised as entertainment. One prisoner, a gaunt man with eyes that refused to yield, met the lion's charge with a desperate cry. He had no weapon, only a broken branch he had snatched from the arena floor. For a moment it seemed absurdly brave, the stick jabbing against the beast's snarling maw. But bravery mattered little against the hunger of a lion. The creature's weight crushed him, teeth tearing through flesh, and the crowd roared louder than the dying man's screams. Children laughed as blood spattered the sand, while nobles clapped as though watching a play. The cruelty of Rome was not hidden, it was celebrated. As the day wore on, the acts grew more elaborate. Gladiators were forced to fight blindfolded, stumbling in confusion as their opponents circled. Some were set alight, their screams mingling with the hiss of burning flesh while the audience cheered as though it were music. Others were chained together, thrown into hopeless battles against armored men or ravenous animals. Each death, each torment, became a story for the citizens to carry home, a reminder of Rome's power over life itself. By the time the sun dipped low, the sand was soaked a deep, clotted red. The stench of blood, sweat, and burning oil hung heavy in the air. Yet the people left satisfied, their appetites for horror sated, at least until the next day. The Colosseum stood silent again, but beneath its floor the cages were already being filled with tomorrow's victims. For Rome, the wheel of cruelty never stopped turning. The darkest truth of these games was not that men died upon the sand, nor that beasts tore apart the helpless, but that the crowd demanded it, an empire of civilization feeding its soul with savagery. The Colosseum was more than stone and arches. It was the beating heart of Rome, and its pulse was blood. Dawn broke over Rome, painting the sky with streaks of crimson, as though even the heavens anticipated the bloodshed to come. Citizens streamed toward the Colosseum, drawn like moths to the promise of violence. Merchants lined the streets outside, selling roasted meats, cheap wine, and trinkets carved in the shape of gladiator helmets. Children darted between the crowds, waving miniature wooden swords, while old men spoke of legendary duels they had witnessed decades before. For Rome, the games were not merely a distraction. They were woven into the fabric of its identity, a reminder that empire was built on conquest, cruelty, and spectacle. Inside, the atmosphere trembled with expectation. The emperor had decreed that today's games would surpass all others. Rumors had spread for weeks, of exotic beasts shipped across deserts, of condemned warriors promised the chance to face impossible odds, of executions staged as theatrical reenactments of Rome's myths. The audience filled the marble seats with restless energy, from senators wrapped in fine togas to paupers squeezed into the highest tiers. When the trumpets sounded, the crowd's roar rolled like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the arena. The first act began not with gladiators, but with a grotesque performance designed to shock. From below the arena floor rose a wooden stage, painted to resemble a forest. Into this false woodland were driven prisoners, men and women dressed in rags, trembling as they were forced to play the roles of condemned characters from ancient tales. One woman, bound in chains, was proclaimed to be the mythical Callisto, cursed by the gods. As the announcer's booming voice carried across the arena, a hidden panel opened, and a starved bear lumbered into view. Its fur was matted, its teeth bared. The woman cried out, begging the gods for mercy, but the audience wanted none. They leaned forward as the bear tore into her, turning myth into massacre. To the crowd, the cruelty mattered less than the illusion. They believed they had witnessed the gods' justice acted out in flesh. As the day progressed, the scale of brutality expanded. Exotic animals Rome had captured in its endless conquests were unleashed one after another. Rhinoceroses charging blindly against armored men, elephants driven into a frenzy with spears, crocodiles dragged from the Tiber and set loose to thrash against shackled prisoners. The more unusual the beast, the greater the roar of approval from the crowd. Each animal's suffering was paraded as a sign of Rome's reach, a living testament that no land and no creature was beyond the empire's grasp. Then came the gladiatorial contests, elevated to a new pitch of savagery. No longer were they simple duels. The organizers staged elaborate mock battles, recreating entire wars upon the arena floor. Hundreds of condemned men were dressed as Rome's ancient enemies, Carthaginians, Gauls, even Persians, armed poorly and driven to face a small, elite force of gladiators drilled to fight with precision. The imbalance was intentional. The crowd reveled in the sight of dozens cut down at once, the sand turning to mud beneath the weight of bodies. Rome's victories were retold in blood, each corpse a reminder of the empire's unstoppable might. But perhaps the most infamous of the day's spectacles came at the emperor's command. A grand contraption was raised from beneath the arena, a massive wooden frame that unfolded like the skeleton of some terrible beast. Upon it, prisoners were strapped, their bodies stretched taut. Oil was poured across their skin, glistening in the harsh light. At the emperor's signal, torches were set to the frame, and flames roared upward. The prisoners screamed as fire consumed them, their voices blending into a chorus that echoed off the Colosseum's stone walls. The smell of burning flesh carried on the breeze, yet the people cheered louder, intoxicated by the cruelty. Some wept, not for pity, but for joy, overcome by the intensity of the spectacle. In the midst of this chaos, one gladiator stood apart. His name was Marcus Vero, a man once hailed as a soldier of Rome, but betrayed and condemned after false accusations of treason. Unlike many forced into the arena, Marcus carried himself with dignity, his eyes hard with defiance. When his turn came, he faced 3 opponents at once, each chosen for their skill. The crowd expected a quick death, but Marcus fought with the precision of a soldier who had survived campaigns across the empire. He parried, struck, and moved with a grace that mesmerized the audience. Against all odds, he brought down each adversary, leaving the sand littered with their broken forms. The Colosseum erupted, not just with delight but with awe. For a moment, cruelty gave way to admiration, and thousands chanted his name. The emperor, intrigued, considered sparing him, a rare honor, but hesitation crept across his face. Mercy could be seen as weakness, and weakness was something Rome's ruler could not afford. The crowd waited, breathless, as Marcus stood, bloodied but unbowed, meeting the emperor's gaze without fear. A flicker of uncertainty passed between them, a silent battle of wills. Finally, the emperor raised his hand, neither granting death nor freedom, but signaling that Marcus would fight again another day. The crowd accepted this with thunderous applause, satisfied that the promise of future blood outweighed the resolution of mercy. As evening descended, the games reached their climax. The arena floor was cleared for the final act. A grand battle between gladiators and a horde of wild beasts loosed all at once. Lions, tigers, panthers, and bears surged across the sand, their roars mingling with the screams of men. The clash was chaos incarnate, steel against claw, flesh against fang. The crowd rose to their feet, screaming in delight as blood sprayed into the air. For hours the carnage continued until neither beast nor man could stand. When silence finally fell, the arena was a graveyard of mangled bodies, the sand soaked so deep with blood, it seemed the earth itself had turned red. When the last trumpet sounded, the emperor rose, his expression calm, as though the horrors of the day were nothing more than an evening's diversion. The crowd departed in waves, drunk on violence, their hearts still racing with the thrill of spectacle. For them, the Colosseum was proof of Rome's greatness, a theater where cruelty was turned into art. Yet beneath the cheers and triumph, a darker truth remained, that every act of savagery, every scream, every death, revealed not Rome's strength, but its insatiable hunger for suffering. The arena emptied, shadows stretching long across the stone. Only the stains remained, black and silent, whispering the stories of those who had fallen. Rome would wake tomorrow, eager for more. For in the darkest corners of the empire's soul, cruelty was not an aberration. It was the heart that kept Rome alive.